Good afternoon, colleagues. A warm welcome to this webinar, which is going to tell you all about how schools are sharing daily attendance data with DfE and what you as school governors and trustees can find out and how you can use this. So thank you so much for joining us today. This is one of a series of webinars that we're holding for local authorities, for schools, and for people like you who are governors and trustees. And the reason we're doing this is because this is a very new project we're doing where we have new tools and data available for schools that we hope will help them improve attendance. And we want to tell you as governors and trustees about these. We will be recording this webinar and it will be published on gov.uk. Please feel free to submit questions in the chat on the right hand side. If there's a question already there that you would like to ask, if you just click like, then we'll know that that's an important question for you, and we'd really welcome your feedback and suggestions. We will also be sharing some useful links in the chat, so if you just keep an eye on that. So what are we going to cover today? We're going to go through this new set of data tools that we're providing for schools to help improve attendance. So we'll give you an introduction to this whole thing and daily attendance data. We'll quickly walk you through the reports that schools can see, as well as local authorities and trusts. We'll tell you how your school can sign up to participate if they're not already. We'll talk about what's being collected and why, and then a little bit about how you as governors or trustees can be involved to support your school. Next slide, please. So why are we doing this at all? So during the pandemic, we all learnt very quickly how important it was to have a real-time picture of attendance. Previously to the pandemic, nationally, we had a termly data on what was going on with attendance in schools, and that was retrospective. And then during the pandemic, we introduced the daily form, an aggregate form called the EdSet form, which we asked schools to complete, which was really, really useful, but very burdensome for schools. And so what we wanted to do was put in place a low burden automated way of sharing attendance data around the sector from schools to DfE and then back out again to local authorities, trusts and schools themselves. So we set up this new way of doing things just about a year ago, and we're really delighted that nearly 80% now schools have signed up to participate in this voluntary process. So if your school is participating, thank you so much. It's as you'll see, we're really excited about this. It's really transformational for us here in DfE and really important for local authorities and for schools to see this. It provides everybody in the system with up-to-date information about what's going on with attendance in the form of interactive reports, which I'll show you. So obviously this is a lot of data moving around the system, so making sure that data is very secure is very important, and we've spent a lot of time making sure that information is secure and looking at data protection and data privacy. So we have published all that information, which you can find on gov.uk, and the links are being put in the chat. And that will also show you details if you're interested in how this operational data is and isn't being used by DfE. So what are we providing back to schools and others? So we've got two things that we're going to briefly show you. One is a thing where the school can go in and have a look at their own data in an interactive, easily accessible way, and that's refreshed daily, and that's secure and only for the school or their local authority or trust to see. And the other is a publication that's available to anybody to see of statistics at national, regional and local authority level. So we'll show you those in a minute. So as we said, obviously maximising attendance is a key priority for us all. There's been a big change in attendance during the pandemic and since the pandemic. So we have put in place this very low burden way of improving data flows, as I mentioned, and we are partnering with a company called Wonde, who one of their members of staff will be here in a moment, who will talk to you. They are a company who are very familiar to most schools. Over 90% of schools already have a relationship with Wonde, and they help us take information from a school's MIS with their agreement and send it to us in DFE in a very completely automated and burden-free way. Next slide, please. So what I'm going to show you now, I said that one of the things that one of the projects that we're providing for schools is an interactive tool that allows them to look at their attendance. So I'm going to show you that now. I would stress, because this information has pupil level data in it, it is not something that you as governors can see, but I want you to be aware that it's something that your school has if they have signed up to sharing their data with us. So they go into something called View Your Education Data, which is a platform that we use to share all sorts of data back with schools. And then when they're in there, they need to click on School Daily Attendance, which is the sort of the service within that, which shows them their attendance data. And then what they see is this page, and that has on it two options. One where they can look at the attendance for all the pupils in their school. That's the school attendance tab. And then there's one called individual attendance, where they can look at attendance data for a single pupil in their school if there's somebody they're particularly concerned about. There's lots of guidance and support about the reports, how to give feedback, how to report a problem. So there's lots of information there. And then what we're going to do is show you what the reports actually look like for a school. So you'll see this is quite detailed. This has obviously been anonymised, but it is for a real school. So at the top there, you've got two rows of what are currently identical figures. It shows you easily the number of pupils in the school, their overall attendance, looking left to right, and then the numbers of pupils who are either persistently absent or severely absent. And you'll see also in the top right hand corner, it shows you when this information was last updated. So this is updated every day with the previous day's data. Then underneath those two rows of figures at the top, there's a section called filters. And on that allows the school to filter the numbers of the pupils in their school by any of the filters shown here. So that's got gender, ethnicity, whether the pupils are persistently or severely absent, their year group, and then various characteristics like free school meals and special educational needs. And then underneath that is the list of pupils. So if we go on to the next slide, please. On this slide, if you look at those top two rows of numbers, you'll see that the second row has now changed. And that's because what we've done here is filter, if you look at the year group filter, we're now looking at just pupils in year 9. So what the school can do is filter by any of those filters or any combination of those filters to hone in on particular groups of pupils they're wanting to look at the absence for. And they can look at that as frequently as they like. Next slide, please. The other way they can look at this is to look at the attendance of a particular individual pupil. So in this case, they'd have the pupil's name, and then you've got 3 different ways of looking at the data for that pupil. So you've got, in a graphical format, you've got their pattern of attendance for the academic year to date. And you can do that for different time periods, the latest week or the last 6 weeks or the whole of the academic year. And then if you look on the right hand side of this page, there's some information about their overall attendance and the number of days they've missed in part or in full, and the days since their last absence. And then underneath, you've got two tabular ways of looking at attendance. Attendance in the last couple of weeks and the attendance codes, and then underneath that, a table showing their attendance in the last 6 weeks. So obviously a lot of detail here, which you as governors would not see on an individual pupil, but it's just to illustrate to you what the school has. Next slide, please. There are two other things that a school can see that compare attendance this year with attendance in the previous academic year. So this is an illustration of the information for a whole school, and you've got, again, at the top, you've got these filters, so you can filter by any of the groups that you can filter on before, and you can look at attendance term by term and see how that compares. Next slide, please. And similarly, you can do the same for an individual pupil and look at their attendance this academic year, term by term, and compare it with the previous academic year. Now, I would say, and we'll come on to this when my colleague talks about the feedback we've had from schools, that obviously, you know, this information has come from schools and we're feeding it back to schools. For some schools, they already have access to this kind of reporting easily themselves from their management information system or from other services that they sign up to. Some of you may, some of your schools may sign up to information from organisations like Fisher Family Trust. But for other schools, getting this information easily out of their management information systems is much more difficult. And what this will do for those schools is save them time. And you'll see that from the user research. Next slide, please. So we also want to show you what a local authority can see. So the way this is set up is that local authorities can see the same sort of data for all the schools, whether they are maintained or academies, who are located in their local authority. And trusts, as you will see, can see all the information about schools in their trust who've signed up to share their data. So could you just go back one slide, please? Schools can see, local authorities can see three types of reports. So these are these three buttons, if you like, in the middle of the page here. So they can see data for all the schools in their local authority, for all the pupils in their local authority, or for an individual pupil. So where there might be a safeguarding issue or pupils with a social worker, for example, that they want to look at the attendance for. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to sort of go through all of these, but just to show you the kind of thing we mean. So in this case, in the local authority, if you look at the top row, there are 40 schools in the local authority who signed up to share their data. And this is an overall attendance rate. And then underneath that, in this case, we've applied a filter, which you can see just underneath, for secondary schools. So there are 5 secondary schools, and then this is showing the overall attendance in those secondary schools. And then again, the local authority can filter by all the sorts of filters we've seen before if they're interested in looking at attendance for particular year groups or groups of pupils. And as we said, local authorities may have a need to look at attendance for individual pupils, and this will give them information from the previous day on the attendance for an individual pupil. And then similarly to schools, local authorities can also look back and see how attendance this year compares to attendance last year, term by term. Yeah, exactly. Like local authorities, if you're from a trust, as we've said, you'll see attendance data for all the schools and pupils in the trust in a similar way to local authorities. So that's what I wanted to show you on the secure reporting for schools, local authorities and trusts that is only available for the data that they are able to see. Next, I'd just quickly like to show you what is publicly available since September. So previously, we've been publishing attendance termly, retrospectively, and this meant that schools didn't have very good comparator information to see how their attendance compared with what was going on anywhere else. What we've been doing since we've got this data, which is absolutely a huge advancement for us and for everyone who's wanting to compare their attendance with others, is we've been publishing a fortnightly dashboard on what's going on with attendance nationally, regionally and in local authorities. And that is available for anyone to see, and hopefully the link to that has just gone into the chat for you. So at the beginning of this academic year, 2 days after the start of term, we were able to report on what the national attendance rate was, and this gave us a really quick insight onto how the return to school was going. And if you remember, at that time there was a big focus on the importance of the return to school. There was articles sort of in the press on from the Children's Commissioner and so on. So a lot of people are looking at this. If you haven't seen it already and you're interested, or please do so, or check if your school is looking at this. I'll just show you a little bit about what you can get from this public dashboard. So as I said, the link will be in the chat for you, but also if you forget the link, all you need to do, if you Google pupil attendance in schools, it takes you to this dashboard. So the sorts of things you can see are you can select by type of school, primary, secondary and special. You can look at the most recent week of attendance or attendance over the academic year, and you can look at it nationally, regionally and by local authority. You know, the reason this is important is that it allows schools to see how their attendance compares with their local authority, with other primary or secondary schools nationally or regionally, and in a very much more timely way than was previously possible. Next slide, please. What it also does is allow schools to look at what's happening elsewhere in terms of authorised and unauthorised absence and reasons for absence. And schools have told us this is also really helpful to them. They want to know whether their level of authorised and unauthorised absence is higher or lower or similar to other schools. And the final thing that schools can do is, this is probably more useful to people who are looking at, attendance, in different parts of the country. But, there are sort of interactive maps and sortable local authority tables if people are interested in particular areas of the country with high rates of absence. So there's a lot of flexibility in this. Please do go and have a look at it if you're interested. So I'm now going to hand over to one of my colleagues, Emma Heslington, who's going to talk to you about what is being collected and why.
Thanks, Caroline. If we could just go on to the next slide, thank you. So all the data terms being collected are actually already collected by DfE at less regular intervals through our census collections and our statutory returns. So we're collecting a number of terms, including all absence and attendance codes, and then we're also collecting pupil characteristics such as gender, free school meal eligibility, and whether they receive SEND support. Collecting these data terms helps us to really target attendance support to specific pupils or cohorts of pupils. And then we collect this for all statutory school-age pupils, as well as years 12, 13, and pupils in reception. So if we could go on to the next slide, we've outlined some of our data collection principles. So DfE will use this voluntary collection to identify trends in school attendance and inform our policy thinking. It will also allow us to signpost LAs and MATs to helpful resources where there may be attendance issues. It is a voluntary collection for schools, and we will not be using this voluntary data for Ofsted funding or judgments on what constitutes a school causing concern. Data protection really has been a key consideration throughout the development of the collection, and you can find our data protection impact assessment on the dailydata.gov.uk webpage. And then at the bottom of this slide, we've included the lawful basis and legislation for processing and sharing this data, which again is the same as for our census collection. It's also worth emphasising that no information that identifies a child will be shared publicly. On the next slide, we've outlined the benefits for schools and local authorities. So this daily data does really tie in with our new attendance guidance, which has really clear expectations for schools and LAs. When a school agrees to share their data, they get access to our reports that provide up-to-date attendance data down to the pupil level. That can really help the school identify pupils that require support in a more timely manner, and it can offer trend insights for groups of pupils. We do recognise that some schools have their own systems, but our user research has actually shown that some of the functions in our reports differ, for example, persistently and severely absent flags. Schools will also benefit from the fact that this data is fed back to their LA, who have a crucial role in supporting attendance, including helping to remove the barriers to attendance that go really beyond the school gates. The daily data helps the LAs work with the schools, for example, through reviewing the data ahead of their termly targeting support meetings and identifying pupils and cohorts at risk of poor attendance. This means that together they can agree targeted actions and can get better access to services for those pupils. So it's worth noticing, as highlighted at the bottom, there is no associated cost for a school when sharing their daily data. So once they've signed up to the collection, it's an automated collection, so there's no additional burden. The more schools that we can get participating in this collection will increase our ability to explore longer term solutions that could then reduce schools' manual data collection burdens. So on my final slide, we've put some of the benefits for governors and trustees. So our guidance also sets out clear expectations for governors and trustees within the attendance space specifically, and this includes regularly reviewing attendance data at board meetings to discuss and challenge trends in attendance, paying particular attention to cohorts in their school with poor attendance historically. So we expect this work to be done with school leaders, setting goals and establishing focus areas for attendance. And for schools that are struggling with attendance, this may then involve developing a more comprehensive attendance action plan, which should be reviewed regularly. We hope that the daily data reports can be used by schools to help identify these key focus areas, and schools can then provide you with a headline attendance figures that can then be discussed. The public dashboard can also be used by schools, governors and trustees to help assess your attendance performance compared to national, regional and local authority figures. So we really do welcome governors and trustees to encourage schools to share their daily data and make use of our reports. I'll now hand over to Ben, who will talk you through the process of sharing the school's daily data.
Thank you, Emma. Next slide, please. Thank you. Wonde are delighted to be supporting schools and the DfE with this daily pupil attendance data project. We thought it would be helpful to take this opportunity to introduce you to Wonde. Next slide, please. Wonde provide more than 25,000 schools with a simple, secure solution to help them manage their data and manage the sharing of their data with their third-party application partners, such as the Department for Education. Once a school has provided their approval, they are able to automatically share the approved data from their school management information system directly to DfE. Strict security layers are in place to ensure that the data integrity is maintained at all times and only approved applications can access specific data. Next slide, please. Through a single platform, schools have total control of who accesses what data. They can approve, decline or revoke access to that data at any time. And our support team are on hand to assist with any school queries regarding the sharing of this data with the Department for Education. Thank you very much. I'll hand you over to Rachel.
Thank you. So I work as a user researcher on the project, so I spend a lot of time speaking to both schools and local authorities. If we could just go on to the first slide, please, I'll give you an idea of the type of work we do. So we undertake a number of activities to better understand how the attendance data is used and improvements we could make to the service. We conduct user research, as I've mentioned, with users. That's roughly once a fortnight, where we're able to discuss overall impressions of the service, how users find it to navigate, and so on. We'll also consider specific areas of the service in more detail, and we may explore further additions that might improve the service. In addition to the user research, we have a feedback survey, which schools can access from the front of page of their daily attendance data, and this provides us with valuable feedback and allows us to quickly identify any problems that might have arisen with the service. Then that research is supplemented with a range of other intelligence, including the number of users accessing the service, analysis of the help desk calls, and a range of engagement activities with representatives from the sector. And then on the next slide, we've got a few quotes that we have gathered during the research with schools, just to give you an idea of how they're finding the service. So in the top left there, you can see a head teacher from a secondary school. He said to me that he thinks the whole thing is really very good. It gives me everything that I wanted. It does all the sorts of analysis that I'm interested in. It really makes doing work on persistent absence really easy. And then over on the right top there, we've got a welfare officer from a primary school, and he said that, as you've seen, running reports on my system is a faff. Here it's all within a click of 1 or 2 buttons. And then moving down to the bottom left, we've got an attendance officer from a primary school, and he said that he liked the days missed, which he can see in the system, and that his system only does it in sessions, so he has to get a calculator out to work it out. And then the final one's a vice principal from a secondary school, and they said that we can click print and get that on one side of A4 to take into a meeting with parents to show them a breakdown of their child. I'll now hand over to Caroline. We'll take you through the rest of the presentation.
CRA in 15 days as well. Thank you very much, Rachel. So we're nearly at the end of this short session. So we just wanted to remind you of how governors can support schools to use these new tools. So first of all, if you can, you could ask your school if they're participating by sharing their data, and if they're not, encourage them to find out more. They would need to get in touch with Wonde, as we've heard, to agree to share their data. It's all very transparent about, you know, what data they need to share. They are in control all the time of what data they share. If they are sharing their data, ask if they are accessing the reports and using them to support their work on attendance. Remembering, as I've said sort of previously, that they may be using other tools, they may be using other existing reports. And as we've said, you know, there is this new fortnightly public dashboard, which is one of the tools that will be really useful for schools to help them understand how their attendance compares with others. I think the final thing I'd say is that we are just starting to create what you've just seen. You know, this has been available for schools since about June time last year. We're always interested in feedback from users. We're continuously developing this product. So this will get hopefully better and better for schools and more useful. And the more feedback we get from schools, the more schools participate in the research that Rachel was talking about, the better the product will be. So thank you so much for your time today. I think we've answered all of the questions that you had in the chat. And that's the end of our session today. Thank you.